and push out the live now tweet. There it is. I always lose my windows at the very beginning. All right. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Sammy K. Powers, and this is the PHP Roundtable. This is a live podcast of developers discussing topics that PHP nerds care about. And the ultimate goal of this podcast is to learn a little something from each other. If you're listening live and you want to be a little part of this shindig, send a tweet to PHP Roundtable, and I will be monitoring that right here. And we'll try to get your question and or comment, your snarky, sly, sarcastic comments addressed on the show live. So, without further ado, have you ever wondered why we went from PHP 5.6 to 7.0? It's because internals developers can't add. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, PHP does have its trouble handling float values, just like the next programming language, but PHP 6 was a real version of PHP that never got released. Today we're talking with a panel of former and current internals developers to hear the story of what happened to PHP 6. Now that we know what we're talking about, let's meet our panel, and in no particular order, I'm going to start off here with Sara Golemon, who's Sara MG on Twitter. She works on getting XP in video games and torturing PHP. Welcome, Sara. Oh, she's muted. Oh, you're all muted.
No, hi.
Hi.
That was really professional, right?
That's awesome.
You can tell why I don't have a job now.
That's awesome. We also have Derick Rethans. And Derick is Derick R on Twitter and works for Mongodb on the PHP and HHVM drivers. In his spare time, he works on Xdebug and enjoys beer and whiskey. Welcome, Derick.
Hello. Or rather, hello. Yes, so I had actually muted it. Never mind.
I'm surprised you didn't actually have something about maps in your one-liner intro.
I forgot.
He also likes maps. We're going to throw that one in there.
Whiskey before maps. That's a very important hierarchy there.
True that.
Yep.
We also have Sean. Sean is Coates on Twitter. Sean Coates is his full name. He works at Fictive Kin, doing mostly ops stuff, and barely touches PHP anymore. Now, did I say that right? Fictive Kin?
Yeah, that's right. Also,
Awesome.
I pressed the mute button correctly. Yay me.
We all can use technology a little bit. So we also have, maybe joining us later, Andrei Zmievski, and he is A on Twitter. That's not a typo, just A. And he works as a principal engineer at App Dynamics in San Francisco and enjoys traveling, photography, and craft beer in his spare time. So hopefully Andrei will join us a little bit later. I think we might have had a time zone issue, an issue that might have actually been fixed with PHP 6. There's a nice little transition in here, too. Talking about PHP 6. So what was everybody's role in playing with PHP 6? I know some of you guys were around at the time. Some of you guys are still around in PHP internals. So maybe we'll start with you, Derick. What was your role in PHP 6?
I remember arguing quite a lot about certain things, mostly about how to do things. I think I implemented some functions, but considering this is so long ago, my memory on this is quite a bit rusty. Don't even know which year it was. So, yeah, bit like that.
Cool.
And now I still argue about it at work. But that's okay.
What about you, Sara?
I think the first thing I was pulled into the PHP 6 thing on was working on the streams layer, making sure that if you're reading a Q8R file, you get Unicode, and if you're reading a UTF-8 file, you get Unicode, and everything comes in right. But later on, it was all just filling in all those conversions that we had to do. And I know Sean linked you a link to his gigantic spreadsheet of all which functions had been converted, which ones hadn't, and how far we got. So there was a lot of work to do. So a lot of what I did was just helping out with the rote work of that. And streams.
Nice. Yeah, actually, we'll get that link to that in the show notes. Sean, that link that you sent in the emails with that huge list, the to-do list of converting all these functions. What was your role, Sean, in PHP 6?
I think that was probably my biggest role, was just helping Andrei with coming up with the markup for that and integrating it with the PHP source code, and then writing some tools around reporting which functions were at least declared Unicode compatible.
Cool. And was that Andrei? What was Andrei's role? Was he kind of mainly driving this thing behind the scenes?
Yeah, I'd say so. He was kind of the main, I guess, like what you said, the driver for Unicode support, and then that kind of became where PHP 5 split into PHP 6, and also, I don't think necessarily anyone's fault, but probably also what killed PHP 6. So, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, we're gonna get to some details on that. And Andrei is joining us just now. Excellent. So,
just as Sean has said, you're the thing that killed PHP 6. It's the perfect time to come in.
That's the opposite of what I just said. Sort of.
So Andrei, once you get your mic stuff set up and you're able to chat with us, go ahead and send a chat here, and I will see it, and we'll get you pinged into the episode. And if you don't mind going ahead and start recording on Audacity, I'll edit this out in post, and that way we can have just your recording, and I can add that in. So let's kick this off with just kind of where was the conversation back many years ago when we were thinking about doing the next major version of PHP 5.6? Where did that go from, like, hey, we're done with the 5x version, branches, versions, minor versions?
Well, that has very little to do with either PHP 6 or Unicode at all. 5.6 came much later, of course, several years. And that was mostly because people, Zend and some other folk, tried lots of things out to see whether it could make PHP itself faster. And because internally that is such a difference, it was going to be necessary to call the new major version number. Although in New Zealand, or the people how people write PHP code hasn't changed very much. It's very much an internal change, making it a lot faster. So that's why we jumped from 5.6 to the next one, which became 7.
So where did that whole kind of conversation go? Like, what was the main reasons for branching off and doing 6? Was it only just to add Unicode support throughout?
The idea was indeed it wasn't really branch off, it was all developed a master. The new master branch was going to become PHP 6. And that was mostly for Unicode support getting in there, and that was such a massive change that it actually made it quite difficult to also add features at the same time. And that also meant that lots of things that people wanted to have the next version of PHP 5.3 at that moment, they couldn't have because Unicode support had to be done first. And yeah, that lingered on for too long for various different reasons. And at that point, decided, well, let's do a 5.3 with the features that were in the master branch but backported to the PHP 5 branch as it was at that moment, to get PHP 5.3 with new features out.
Gotcha. Andrei, are you able to hear us? All right, I can see your mouth moving, but I don't actually hear anything yet. But I can see you.
How about now?
Yeah,
Yep.
There we go. Woo! Welcome, Andrei.
All right, let me set up the Audacity so it records.
Perfect. Sounds good. Now, while he's doing that, if you're listening to, if you've been listening along, we've mentioned Unicode a couple times, and we've had an entire episode on this very topic. It's number 46, character encoding and UTF-8 in PHP. So if you're not familiar with Unicode or UTF-8 or anything like that, go ahead and check out that episode. We go into pretty much a lot of detail about what character encoding is all about, and in fact, in that episode, we had some questions about PHP 6, and we're like, you know what? It'd be cool to like have an episode about PHP 6 because I don't know if everybody knows about what was going on in trying to add Unicode support in PHP.
So Unicode is quite a bit more than just the character sets. It's
true.
also the sorting, the ordering, collations, calendar formatting, name it. Iterating through strings, there's so much more in it than just character encodings. And that is actually what probably the main problem was. There's not as much character set support, which PHP had at least a reasonable amount of features.
We can discuss what was the main problem, but
Yeah, well,
I just pulled up the talk I gave in Nashville about Unicode and what happened in PHP 6, just to refresh my memory.
Yes, I think I saw that. You've got it up on SlideShare, right? Or something like
It
that.
should be on SlideShare or on my site, I think.
Very cool. Yeah, because so you mentioned internationalization, or I-18N, or localization, L10N, as the abbreviations for those. So that actually encompasses a lot more than just supporting all the characters that you might encounter, right? Like you mentioned, it talks about sorting and how to display dates and things like that. So PHP 6 was not just about adding full UTF-8, or I should say UTF-16 support to everything, all the things PHP, but also deal with all the localization issues, right?
That's right. But the way we chose to approach that is to split out most of the internationalization and localization part into a separate extension, which is still around and still being used. But all the character set, native character set handling and UTF-16 handling was in the PHP engine.
Cool. So what's different about how PHP handles all that stuff now in its current engine, and the, like, if I were to try to have to localize something, what are some of the problems I would run into today that maybe PHP 6 would have solved for me?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that today you're forced to do what you've always done in PHP, and it's just like, well, deal with these character sets yourself. Like, you've got MB string, you've got ICONV, you've got uConverter. Figure out what character set your data is coming in as, convert it to something nice and manageable, like UTF-8 perhaps. Do all your stuff internally in that encoding, and then push out whatever the client is expecting, whatever encoding that happens to be. That was all going to be magic and just sort of happen for you in PHP 6, quote unquote, to a degree, asterisk. Now you have to do what you had to do in PHP 5, which is just call those functions explicitly at various points in your code base, and it's not that hard to do. UTF-8 is a very malleable, portable sort of encoding that works very well for most purposes. So I think, to me, that was part of PHP 6's demise, is that the industry kind of moved underneath us as we were working on it. At the beginning, we had browsers were typically not sending UTF-8 with their requests, and not all the browsers knew how to deal with UTF-8 in response. We had to do all these transcodings going. But sort of fast forward a few years, and everybody's adopting UTF-8 properly, and we can start passing that around much more reliably, and a lot of that difficulty and hardship kind of disappeared on us. That's at least my take on it. Others might disagree with me.
Well, I think that's pretty much the case. I mean, I think most people are just defaulting to UTF-8 now and being perfectly okay doing that. I mean,
yeah, which UTF-8 works perfectly fine for people doing maybe what used to be called Latin 1 or Western character encodings, but for everybody else, you still need to jump through hoops to do any sort of manipulation of that.
Like finding out word lengths and things like that.
Yeah,
is still a problem.
Yeah, and that's part of why the UTF-16 was chosen in the first place, because of the consistent code point length, right, Andrei?
Well, consistent
it's consistent to a degree, because it was a compromise between UTF-8 and UTF-32.
Mm-hmm.
But it's besides that, there's also that a character can consist of multiple code points anyway.
Yeah, it's very.
And you need to be able to deal with that as well, and that the encoding doesn't matter in that case. You still have to handle that.
What was the ultimate decision, or when did that decision get made to choose UTF-16 over UTF-8 or UTF-32?
I don't know. It was pretty early on when I started the project, when working at Yahoo. I mean,
well, essentially, libicu, which is the underlying library we're using for a lot of PHP 6, made that decision for us. Its
that's true, yeah.
I mean, we keep saying UTF-16. Technically, it's UCS-2, which is subtly different in some certain ways. But no, or was it UTF-16? I always get them backwards.
No,
This is exactly why this stuff never works.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, UTF-16 has surrogate pairs, UCS2 does not.
Right, and it does use a surrogate pair. So sorry, it is UTF-16. I'm trying to sound clever, and I'm failing at it. So yeah, ICU basically made that decision for us. It likes to use its UTF-16 UCARs, so that just made it an easy thing to do.
Yeah, in PHP 7 we have quite a few new features that help us with UTF 8 support, I guess. With the new there's like an inline string literal syntax, right? That it's like /u and then the code point within curly brackets, and then there's the new international INTL class, right? That
that was the extension that we developed in parallel with introducing the Unicode natively.
Well, the extension's been in since 5.3. I think you're referring to the new class that I added that just has a bunch of stuff.
Oh, the conversion stuff.
Yeah, that's not a very important class. The stuff that it does is very sort of edge, fringe kind of stuff. The literal syntax for the strings, I think, is a nice addition because up until now, if you want to put a UTF string, your choice is either, well, say, okay, my file is UTF-8. I'm going to put the literal character in there, and it looks great, but God help me if it gets read incorrectly for whatever reason. Or you put in, 2 to 4 hex bytes, which have absolutely no meaning for you looking at the string later on. This allows you to just say, yeah, I'm putting up code point U plus 236BA, and that is something I can look up quickly rather than having to decode those 4 bytes.
Yeah, speaking of string literals, I don't know if it was Everett Pott or Andreas Hagel from the character encoding episode, but one of them mentioned that there's this sort of vestigial syntax that exists in PHP to add the B, the letter B before a string literal, and that's supposed to do something magical in the back end, but now it doesn't actually do anything. What's the B?
That was meant to be able to write literal byte strings without any encoding interpretation.
PHP 6 was going to have Unicode character strings as their default strings.
Yeah.
Whereas the B would make no special things apply to those strings. So it would exact like just the bytes that you would have put in PHP 4 and 5.
I don't remember why it's still around actually.
I was about to ask that.
I think the reason it was kept around was just basically, well, why get rid of it? It doesn't break anything to be there. We may change our minds about Unicode someday. I don't think that's the case anymore, but if we ever did, it would be nice if we had this backwards compat syntax that says, okay, PHP 9 is going to have full Unicode support, and so start writing your code, but oh, wait, we didn't have B around all through 6, 7, and 8, so you're going to have to, make code that isn't going to run on 8 and have all kinds of problems. Well, if we just leave it in, then we've got that syntax since forever.
Plus, think of all the PHP 6 books that would be wrong.
Oh, we wouldn't want that, would we?
So does it just get lost at the parser, or does it actually make its way down into the engine and does anything, or is it just...
I think it's a no-op right now, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't even get to the parser. It gets thrown out in the lexer.
Yeah.
As early as possible. It's just like, oh, B's there? Forget that.
So if you really want to piss off one of your fellow programmers, just starting adding a lowercase b directly in front of all your string literals, just for fun, because why not? Make the diff look
yes, you caught us out. We left it for trolling purposes. Yeah.
It's the only way to do it.
Actually, I'm sitting here wondering if HHVM actually supports B as a leader to the string literals.
I can find it out for you quite easily.
Yeah, check EL.org.
Maybe in HHVM it actually does something. Maybe it's the Easter egg.
Yeah, I got the Easter bunny.
Just for some other background info, that syntax is similar to other languages too. Like that's how you denote. You use the U for Unicode strings in Python,
Cool.
And so like the Python 2 to Python 3 transition, there's a lot of that same kind of adding to your code.
Well, and Python has B prefix as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
so
when
there is no
HHVM
default
does support
same
it.
Nice.
Parse is just fine in HHM. Works.
Sweet. So do we credit that one to Sara?
That syntax compatibility is very important, but no, that one wasn't me.
Okay. So I'm curious to hear, throughout this time as PHP 6 was being developed, what was kind of the development span? Like, how long did it kind of take, and what was kind of the thought process along the way? Like, were things kind of running really smoothly there for a while?
Let's see. Well, it got kicked off, I think, in 2005 or so. And initially, it involved just a small group of people from Yahoo's end and a couple of people from PHP development community. Because we didn't want to involve the whole internals list and the design of this project, because it seemed to be a pretty big one from the start. And yeah, it took some time to figure out how we wanted to implement things, because we needed to have Unicode everywhere, including in the engine and the extensions and the API, and we didn't want to, cut corners and like omit certain locales or give bias to any particular language. So the development was in a separate repository for probably 6 to 7 months, and then once we had the basics working, we announced it on internals and merged it into the PHP tree. And at that point is when the discussion started that it was probably too big of a thing to be slated for 5.x, whatever it was at the time, and that we needed to have a major version bump.
And that's probably where the story actually gets kind of pushing the direction one way or another, whether PHP 6 is going to actually get released, right?
No, that was much later, because for a while, I mean, and it was at least another 9 months to a year where we were just going through and converting all the extensions to support Unicode, and a lot of that was kind of drudge work. Part of the reason, I think, why the project wasn't very successful in the end is that it's not a trivial thing to do, and to convert an extension to support Unicode, especially works with strings. So there were probably maybe a dozen people who understood the intricacies of the Unicode itself, the libicu, the PHP extensions, and how to make them work together. So it definitely lacked mind share during that time. I mean, a couple of people joined along the way, but it was still a long process. And in the end, I think people just decided that implementation was too technically difficult. And I think people were also just bored converting code that already worked, basically, for them. Not for everybody, but for them.
Yeah, I think you can actually... Sorry, go ahead.
I also remember some benchmarks being made to see how some of the major applications would be running, and seeing the extra amount of memory being used and it being a fair bit slower, I think also made it... people found it less interesting to work on, right? Because you suddenly lose like 40% of your performance for any reasonable app that does a fair bit of data and string shuffling.
Right. Performance is always more fun to work on than string shuffling, right?
Exactly.
Well, I think that was also another thing. I mean, if you look at the features that came out in 5.3, basically everything that wasn't 6 got turned into 5.3.
5.4.
What's that?
5.4.
5.4? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Then my whole argument falls apart. But even for 5.4, clearly people are working on things that weren't PHP 6.
Right.
If we were making a concerted effort to cross the line for PHP 6, that's where the effort would be for at least half of the people who were actively contributing at the time, and we definitely weren't at that threshold.
Yeah, I think looking back at my slides, I think what I also said here, and this probably still holds true. I think the project just ran out of steam because in the PHP development culture, people work on what they're interested in, and clearly not enough people are interested in working on this.
Well, it was a big blocker too. It was like someone wasn't going to do work on another feature and target it for PHP 6 if they didn't really expect PHP 6 to be released soon. So it's the same kind of thing you run into like anytime you do a major rewrite of like a giant component library or a software project where you're like, I don't want to put the effort into doing new features if they're going to sit unused for the next 2 years until whatever major version of Drupal gets released or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the same symptom that we see elsewhere too, I think.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about contributing to internals. You know that features will be used pretty widely in about 7 years. So I think that's actually, that time frame has actually gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. I feel like 7 adoption's actually been. Does anybody have any statistics on like 7's adoption and comparing it to like when people were upgrading from 4 to 5?
No, I don't. But I think that having like a yearly release schedule is actually really quite handy. Because it won't take 2 or plus years for features to make, and it's at max a year now, or not at all.
Right. There's definitely a big move on just web projects in general, wanting to support the latest version of PHP, and I feel like back in the day that wasn't really in the zeitgeist of PHP culture at the time of letting the projects, they wanted to support the most backward compatible PHP version they could. All their file extensions were .php3 and stuff like that. So I feel like that was a big change.
But at the same time, sorry.
Like as of May, about 20% of Laravel installs were PHP 7, which is pretty impressive.
Nice.
All that stuff is also just like a general change in the way you deploy things too. Like back in like 2005, 2006, there was still a large number of shared PHP installs, and I think that's probably dropped significantly just because of things like cloud computing and people launching containers and that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry so much about impacting your 10,000 customers when you upgrade a PHP version. You have to, you care about your customers that do the upgrade, or you care about the customers that get new boxes, not old ones that have had working apps for 5 years.
True that. So at what point in the development of PHP 6 did you guys start realizing like maybe this isn't going to be a thing after all?
Good question. I think, let's see, let me look at my slide. I think I said that it happened early March 2010, when people got fed and just started, put it into a branch and started working at 5.4. But it was probably a little bit before then. You could get the idea that it wasn't going to be a viable project anymore.
That sounds about right. It feels like it was 2009 or so when I just sort of felt like nothing's really moving anymore, and I don't care about this anymore. And
well, right, that was another part of it. I kind of got tired of pushing the boulder up the hill too.
Yeah.
Was it mainly just trying to convince the mailing list, the internals mailing list, that hey, we need to do this and get people to back it?
Yeah, that was a part of it. And then, this project was also going on for close to 4 years now, I guess, at that point.
I think there were a lot of factors involved, and let's not forget the thing we brought up earlier in the conversation is that the industry did move in this period, and UTF-8 had already become a much more viable transport mechanism across the web, and the fact that we had all the localization stuff nicely packaged up into the Intel extension and still usable meant that the whole concept of PHP, the whole basis for PHP 6 may not be as relevant as it was when the project started. Mm-hmm. So I think that also helped sort of put the nails in the coffin, along with the perf problems and along with other reasons for not needing to drive PHP 6 as much as we did at the beginning.
I think it's worth noting that a lot
Andrei's
of
grimacing.
I don't know if you can see the chat. A lot of it's worth noting that a lot of people who worked on core PHP stuff, I don't know if it's a lot, but definitely some significant players, and Sara and Andrei Rasmus worked there. They worked at Yahoo, and right in that period, I don't know exactly when you guys vested and left or whatever it was, but like there was definitely a career transition for a lot of people during that time, and I think a lot of people just didn't have the same kind of like I'm getting paid to do this kind of ambition they had as like, well, I'm advancing my own career instead of getting paid to work on PHP. And I think a lot of people still did work on PHP. I know, Sara, you hung in there for, I think, longer than everybody else. But there's definitely like a real-life transition that happened there outside of PHP itself, I think.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, I left Yahoo in 2007, which was a couple years after the project kicked off. So, and I was still working on PHP and Unicode until, like I said, March 2010 or so. But at that point, it was about 10 years of working on PHP, and I kind of got burned out.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually still at Yahoo for a few years after that, but at no point where they actually, like, was that part of my job. It was sort of the thing that I was working on instead of my work most of the time. But I hit that same sort of wall that Andrei hit, that, like, you know what, I just don't even want to deal with PHP anymore. So when I went to Facebook, I'm pretty sure they had in mind they wanted me working on hip-hop. When I got there, though, at the end of boot camp, I said, you know what, I want to work on mobile for a while. Let me do some Java on Android stuff, and I don't want to touch PHP for 2 years. So we all hit that sort of burnout wall.
Did they let you go full 2 years without touching it?
Pretty much, yeah. I was on another project, and then that project ended, and I said, okay, I've cleansed. I've gotten it out of my system. I can go work on it again. And then 4 years later.
So is my mic doing that weird thing again, that crackle noise?
It's a little bit. Yeah.
No. Okay, I don't know. I think there's something wrong with my mic. It happened in an episode before, and I can't filter it out. I've tried in post so hard. So if you're listening and you know a way to filter out this crackling sound, please let me know, because I have to do that in post. So sorry for the Google Hangouts people who have to deal with this. Actually, I'm going to switch.
There's like one USB chipset that does that after a while. But at least I remember from my podcasting days where you have to unplug it and plug it back in. Like there's a hard reset that you need to do, and sometimes that helps.
As with a lot of tech.
We lost so many episodes that way.
Oh have you tried turning it off and on again?
Yeah, exactly.
I have actually tried that, and it didn't work, unfortunately. And I'm afraid to unplug it while I'm recording with Audacity at the moment. So internal mic. This one's not crackling, right?
No, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
Sounds okay too.
Sweet. All right. So when PHP 6 decided, or when it was kind of understood that PHP 6 wasn't going to be officially released at the current state, where was the decision to sort of like start taking some of the features that were being worked on in 6 and bringing it into 5.4?
Well, it wasn't quite PHP 6 wasn't going to be released. It was that the Unicode project was going to be shelved in a sense, while the other features were being put into 5.4 and so on. And I think there was that whole discussion about what to name the next big release, 6 or 7, right? So there was still intention of releasing 6 at the time that the Unicode project got branched.
Yeah, speaking of that, that was actually fairly more recent. Before 7 was released, there was a big debate on whether to name the next version of PHP.next 7 or 6. For those of you who were still around during that time, what was sort of the main discussion there?
Well, I remember it because it happened right in the middle of OSCON 2014, and I'm running around, just casually checking, what is this converse? God, what? And I act like I was completely exacerbated by the trivialness of it, but the reality is, like, I actually made an argument for PHP 7 because, like, the people that you've got here in these windows, like, we put work into this. We put a number of years of trying to make this happen, and it does feel like it deserves an integer bump, because that's all we're talking about. This is not a finite resource. We can retire this jersey, and there's plenty more to come. So I made a argument strongly in favor of PHP 7, but compared to the scalar type hint stuff, which was also still raging on at the time, it was such a lower priority that I just sort of I said, okay, fine, here's my argument, and I'm walking away from the conversation because I don't know why people got upset about it. The people who said, oh no, people are going to get confused if there's no 6. No, nobody's going to get confused. Nobody's going to get confused about the books at the one Borders left in town that is all about PHP 6. Nobody's getting confused by that. It's all just... Sorry, I'm going to stop ranting.
Oh, what she said.
Well, now we have 7, and it does, I guess, kind of makes sense to kind of talk about PHP 6 because you can talk about this whole thing that was happening and just call it PHP 6 because that's what it was, right?
Exactly, it was a thing. It existed.
Right.
Now, what would you call this podcast if we called the current version PHP 6?
Did we actually make a release of PHP 6 at some point? I think there was an alpha release or two, if not more. You remember that, Andrei?
Vaguely.
Okay.
So there might be a server out there that's actually running an alpha version of PHP 6.
It is likely.
With lots of B's on their string literals.
Yep.
Another trolling opportunity. Add header served by PHP 6.
Oh.
Sarah, could you please start a podcast called the PHP Trolling Hour? I would definitely, absolutely, I would listen to that.
I have a Facebook page for that. It's called Because PHP, and it's all of the weird crap that we discovered implementing HHVM that PHP does.
What's it called?
Where is
It's called Because PHP. It's a Facebook page. Search for
nice.
Because, PHP.
I've seen some of your tweets where you show something, a feature we'll call it, of PHP, and then you'll say because PHP, and I always thought it was just like the random things you ran into, but I think I guess it's part of that official page.
I need to get in the habit of linking it more often. I occasionally link to the Because PHP post as well, but these things always wind up on Twitter first. Like I'll tweet about it, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I should probably put it on the page, shouldn't I? If any of you want to be able to post to that page, message me. We'll sort that out because I'm sure you see all kinds of stupid.
No, read-only mode from you, please.
I don't write PHP code.
Sean, you do Ruby these days, so you.
No, I do not do any Ruby. I do as little Ruby as possible.
But yeah, fun times. PHP, great language.
Well, is there anything that you can take away from kind of the thing that happened with PHP 6? Is there anything that we can learn from that to kind of like apply to other projects and things like that as we contribute to open source and lead projects and things like that?
So I mean, my take on that question is sort of like, first off, don't look at PHP 6 as a failure. It wasn't. Like, it was a great learning opportunity. It drove a lot of the design that went into the Intel extension. And it's it was useful. Like we got things out of it. It was sort of painful, but it was useful. So just for me, the lesson is don't sit around and think, gosh, is this something we need to build? Should we build it? How should we? But just start building the damn thing. And if you have to throw it out, that's okay, because what you're going to wind up with on the other side is eventually going to be better. I see some shaking of head from Andrei, but that makes sense. Okay.
I agree. It was a great lesson in project management and people management too.
Yeah.
Andrei, are you using some of those skills today to on your current projects?
Some of them. I try to stay away from management generally. So little.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious where you guys are now. I think the real question is, I know some of you aren't even doing PHP anymore. So, Andrei, what are you up to these days? You don't really get much into PHP?
I've been working at AppDynamics for the last 4.5 years, and while it was sort of related to PHP in a sense that we were developing our product to support PHP, which is kind of a monitoring troubleshooting system. So that was a PHP extension. but it's all like C++ and Java and some Python and things like that. But I don't think I've written more than 100 lines of actual PHP code here, except for the tests.
Yeah, that's what I end up doing now as well, writing C and C++ and using PHP to write tests. But interestingly, today I was actually talking about collation in MongoDB. So we're finally going to get that. And it is interesting to see that some of the same discussions happened again on how to do with collation kind of thing. Collation is the way of how you sort and search strings specifically in a database. So even all those years later, it's still not a 100% solved problem, right?
What about you, Sarah? What are you up to?
Well, I left Facebook months ago, February actually. So I'm mostly sitting by the pool and enjoying cocktails and fun employed. But no, programming-wise, I still get involved with PHP. I'm still subject myself to the internals list, and I think so. When I left Facebook, it had nothing to do with the HHVM team itself. I love that team. There's a great bunch of people. And I particularly think that Hackling is pretty awesome. My jury was out on it until I actually had to work on some PHP code, add Facebook and add some features to some of the CI system. And when I actually started using the type checker on a regular basis, I realized, oh my God, I'm writing this like 10 times faster and more bug-free than I would have otherwise. And so I've become a zealot for static type analysis, and I would really like to get both that and a lot of the sort of extra hack features like the short closures and things like that into PHP in some form. I'm resigned to the fact that we're not going to be syntax compatible, but that's okay because hack is a different syntax and they can live side by side. But I definitely want to see a lot of these functionalities get into PHP, which is why 2 or 3 days ago I actually relaunched XHP. Years and years and years ago, when Facebook was actually still on PHP, they were running an extension called XHP, which adds XHTML tags as first-class syntax to PHP. And they sort of abandoned that extension when they switched over to Hack and HHVM because it's all baked into the language. So I've picked that back up. I've adapted it for 7, got it running again, and I'm starting to add some new features like real name spacing to XHP, which it didn't have at the time because they were basing it on PHP 5.2, and just trying to bring those hack features into PHP if I can. Where possible, I do that by extension, so I don't have to deal with internals. But some of those things do require help from internals. Help.
Do you ever foresee that extension being pulled into PHP.next, 7.next or something?
Potentially. Like if it gets heavy adoption and lots of projects are using it, I think it makes sense to bake it into PHP simply because what it's doing right now is it's essentially parsing the entire PHP file, re-emitting most of it just as the original text, and then rewriting the little bits that it needs to rewrite in order to make the XHP look like real PHP. Like when you have a tag like less than a greater than, that actually translates into new XHP underscore a, attributes as an array, children as an array. It's a really ugly hack to make the thing work, but it works well enough as an extension right now. I think if we got enough adoption, yeah, we would probably want to integrate that straight into the parser, but we are a long way from that right now.
Is it kind of like JSX?
So JSX was actually based on XHP.
That's right. I feel like we talked about that in the Flux. What was it? The React.js and Flux architecture episode that we had like a long time ago on PHP Roundtable. I think we talked about that, and one of the method names was like dangerously set HTML.
Things like there are backdoors that I hate, and I wish the backdoors didn't exist, but they kind of need to for various reasons.
True. Well, what about you, Sean? What are you up to?
So I'm doing mostly operations stuff at this point, so like systems administration and architecture for like highly available apps that we they don't wake us up when they go down, that kind of stuff, and helping build out our development environments and doing monitoring and metrics and all that kind of stuff. So I'm still doing like a whole bunch of programming for that stuff, but not really applications programming so much as like DevOps kind of stuff, where like our configuration management is essentially a bunch of Python and configuration declarations that require constant maintenance. So that kind of stuff.
Cool. So it sounds like I guess Derick and Sara are kind of like the of the panel. Those are the two that are kind of still involved in internals. But Derick, yours is more kind of on the MongoDB side, right?
Yep, more on that side, but I also still look after the daytime stuff. And if I find the time for that, most of the time I now spend looking after Xdebug, because I find it more fun. And yeah, it's been so many years later now, and people find all the interest to do as well. And yeah.
Xdebug's really popular. I can't blame you for.
I have heard of this thing before, yeah.
But how many postcards have you gotten?
Oh, I've moved three times since, so I'm not sure whether this card is still arriving somewhere in Norway. That'd be quite fun.
Some poor guy in Norway is just like, who is this Derick and why do I keep getting his mail?
What is Xdebug?
Yeah.
Yeah, Xdebug is so you that's cool to hear that you guys are still involved a little bit, and I know we're kind of running really late on time here, so I need to start wrapping things up. But before we do, I have a shout out to Chris Shaw, who set up the show notes for episode 50, which is the PHP for beginners. That was the previous episode. So thanks, Chris, for doing the show notes for that episode. And if you'd like to do show notes, contribute the show notes, it's just markdown format. You just go to github.com/phproundtable/show-notes, and you'll see it in there. You can do a pull request. Also, I'd like to shout out for two conferences that are coming up that you should totally check out. One, Pacific Northwest PHP, which is in Seattle, Washington, September 15th through the 17th, 2016. I was selected as a speaker, woohoo, so I get to speak. That'll be my first ever conference talk ever. So they're going to take a bet on me, so hopefully I won't let them down. No, I will not let them down. And I'm going to be talking about how my journey was to the center of PHP, and that's actually some of these people here on this panel actually played a big role in that. So also ZenCon, which is in Las Vegas, Nevada. That's October 28th through the 21st, 2016. I'm also going to be speaking there, woo! And it's actually a huge conference with many tracks and lots of entertainment. Like there's Cirque du Soleil there. I don't think that's the. I don't think they're officially going to perform for ZenCon attendees, but they are there in Las Vegas. So definitely come and hang out with us. It'll be a super good fun time. And finally, we got to wrap this thing up with a developer shout out, which is a segment that recognizes developers in the whole world of awesome open source and just awesome PHP communities for doing something really awesome. Because there's a lot of people who do a lot of thankless contributions to the community. And in order to recognize this person, we have a $50 Amazon gift card here that is provided by Laracasts. And if you've never heard of Laracasts, it's this great website. It's a great resource for learning all kinds of things in PHP. We talked about it a lot in the last episode when we were talking about PHP for beginners. But even if you're not a beginner, if you're a seasoned professional and there's something about PHP that you're just not really familiar with, or that you'd like to learn more about, or even how, like a development process, definitely check out Laracast.com. There's all kinds of great content on there, and Jeffrey Way's putting stuff up there all the time, new stuff. So for this episode, I asked the panel to nominate somebody who would be great for this developer shout out, and they nominated Simon Welsh. So Sara, why did you guys nominate Simon Welsh?
Well, Simon, to me, like he embodies good open source principles. He's been an early adopter of HHVM and Hackling, but he's also been contributing a lot of patches back to the project and really helping out with debugging of issues and just everything to do with the project. He's been a big part of just helping us get it out there and get it stronger. So thanklessly. So thanks, Simon.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I will reach out to you to get you a developer shout out. Andre, I know you have to leave. Yeah, do you have anything that you would like to promote real quick before you head out?
Nope, not particularly.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us in this session. I know you're really busy, so thanks for joining.
Yep, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. And so speaking of shameless plugs, let's wrap it up with some shameless plugs. Let's kick it off with Derick. You got anything you want to promote?
Yes. I've already mentioned my love for whiskey earlier, so I started working on a little application called dram.io. Actually, it's a website at the moment because I haven't learned how to write mobile apps yet. And it's an application that I use to rate and comment on whiskies. Very similar to Untapped, but then for whiskey. And Work has a conference coming up called Mongodb Europe. If you're interested in that, there should be 20% off with a discount code that you can find in the show notes as well. But it's in London.
Very cool. Awesome. What about you, Sean? You got anything you want to promote?
Nothing big. I just relaunched my website finally after many years of it just sitting around. So seancoates.com. I have a couple posts up there, and there's a couple already written. So that means it won't die immediately this time. So maybe there will be some content in the future. Hopefully, maybe, possibly.
Awesome. And finally, Sarah, do you have anything that you want to promote?
I'm just going to repeat XHP again because that's my current baby. So check out github.com/phplang/xhp, and that'll get you the extension, and the XHTML library for it is at same URL /xhp-lib. It's work in progress still. It totally functions. You can work with it, but I'm sure it needs lots of improvements. So file issues, send pull requests. If you want to hack on it too, I'll add you to the org, and we can make XHP awesome and take over the world. Other than that, the new WoW expansion drops in 2 weeks, so I'm excited for that.
The new what?
World of Warcraft.
Oh.
My little Nomi needs to get out there and beat up some elves.
I never got into it, unfortunately.
All right.
Well, actually, I forgot to mention earlier. I was going to ask you about you posted a library about that plays around with the new AST layer that exists in PHP 7. What was the status of that?
Well, the status of that is it functions. It does what it's supposed to do. Right now, what that is limited to basically a code beautifier and a little bit of transpiling. So you can take PHP 7 code and actually produce PHP 5.6 output, for example. So it'll make your code automatically backwards compatible with older versions. That was sort of the general idea behind it, and the ability to just make conceptual changes without having to do your own parsing. I found out after I published it, like literally a few minutes after, because somebody tweeted a response at me, that Nikita Popov actually has a PHP-based PHP parser, which I would rather use because the version I released requires something called AST-Kit, which is a C extension. You have to compile that and build it into your PHP. So rather than force people to use an extension, I'd rather just be able to write this straight in PHP. So I'm probably going to port the entire thing to use that, and then we'll start working on that. And then, yeah, theoretically, that'll allow you to do stuff like apply coding standard rules automatically, backport things. Maybe you could cross-compile stuff to hack, or even JavaScript or WASM or whatever else you want to translate your code into, theoretically.
I've heard of a lot of theoretical things you can do with the AST layer, but I haven't seen any official projects other than yours and Nikita's that actually even deal with the AST layer.
Yeah, in practice, I was mostly learning it just to get a really good handle on exactly what all the AST nodes are and do and how they're supposed to work. I found a few bugs in the engine in the process, so I've been fixing those as I go. Fortunately, they're bugs in really esoteric edge places, so they're not serious stuff. It's like, how does an assert error get displayed kind of stuff. So.
I think that etsy's fan also uses it.
Mm-hmm.
It is an extension done by Etsy that allows you to scan for incompatibilities between PHP 5, 6, and 7. And there's a whole bunch of other things as well.
Yeah, fan is actually really great. It's basically PHP's answer to the hack type checker, is what it is. And it does a really good job, given the constraints of PHP syntax. Is the worst thing I'm going to say about it.
True. Well, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us and kind of learning what happened to PHP 6. And it's cool to see that there's still little pieces of PHP 6 that's still around. So it's still a piece of us. If you want to join us for our next episode. It's going to be a happy birthday version of the PHP Roundtable because it will be officially 2 years, woohoo, on August 25th. Not really sure what's going to go down on that one, but I don't know, come up with something fun. And then I've got 2 other episodes here that are kind of tentatively scheduled for September. I haven't really asked anybody to come onto the panel yet, but one is why I'm afraid to admit that I use PHP, which would be an interesting discussion. And then another one is sort of on the business end, and this is sort of not specific to PHP, but any contract work, but hourly versus value-based pricing. Some reasons why you might choose hourly over value-based and what value-based is and all that fun things. So thanks again for joining us. I'd like to specifically thank Andrei, who just left us, but Derick, Sara, and Sean for joining us in this discussion. And we'll see you folks in the next episode.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.